she has spent the last month researching the exhibition and the rare limited edition illustrated book, The Princess of Tripoli. It's only been written in German and Czech and French. And so there is no English translation, but Rachel is well into translating the entire volume in English, and we may actually end up publishing it in the not too distant future. So with that, here's Rachel.
So hello, thank you David for the introduction. My name is Rachel. I will be guiding you through The Princess of Tripoli today. And just so you know, just a point in the beginning that this is going to be a mobile talk. So if you're sitting, feel free to keep sitting, that's totally fine, but I am going to be moving around and pointing to specific pieces. So if you'd like to follow me around, feel free to do so. These pieces are great close up, so you definitely have to take a look at them up close, whether it's while I'm talking or later or some other time when you come back. So the music that was playing before we all started here was a modern recreation of the original Occitan language, which was used by medieval minstrels when they were writing poems. And this is related to The Princess of Tripoli because the main character in this story, whose name is Geoffrey Rudel, was a minstrel and a prince. And he was an actual person, aside from being a romantic character in this story. And he wrote a poem about a beautiful woman that he had never seen before, but that he fell in love with. So that was the song that we were hearing before. And now I found an English translation of this poem, so I'll be reading that to you. In May, when the days grow long, the sound of distant birdsong enchants me, and when I am parted from her, my mind turns to my distant love. My desire becomes dark and downcast, so that birdsong and May blossom mean no more to me than icy winter. I believe that he is my true Lord, who will grant me the sight of my distant love. But for one good thing that comes my way, I suffer two ills, for I am so far from her. Oh, why am I not a pilgrim there, where my wooden staff and rough coat might feel the touch of her beautiful eyes? What a joy it will be when I ask her for the love of God to grant me lodging in her distant land. And if she so wills, I shall find shelter near to her, although I am from afar. For that is a noble conversation, when a lover from afar comes so close that he enjoys solace in a courtly manner. I shall be wretched and sorrowful when I leave, if I do not see this distant love. I do not know when I shall see her, for our homelands are so far distant. There are so many paths and mountain passes, and for this reason I am divided from her. But all shall be as she wills it. Never again shall I rejoice for love if I do not enjoy this distant love, for I know of none better or finer anywhere, neither far nor near. Her merit is so rich and surpassing that there in the land of the Saracens I would be declared captive by her. God, who made all that comes and goes, and who shaped this distant love, give me the power, for I already have the will, that I may see this distant love, in reality, in some place where we are at ease, and then this garden would seem to me a new palace. It is no more than the truth to call me eager, or full of desire for my distant love, for no other joy pleases me as much as enjoyment of my distant love. But that which I desire is so contrary to me, for my Father set this fate upon me, that I should love, but not be loved. So this was an original poem written by the actual person. However, this story is very romanticized and probably not real, but just keep that in mind while I'm telling you the story, but it is based on real events. So the real Geoffrey Rudel was a 12th century prince and minstrel, as I said, and he's one of the two major characters aside Ilse, the Princess of Tripoli, who is the titular character. In real life, he went on the Second Crusade against Islam with the Catholic Church. After hearing of the beauty of a woman named Hodierna of Tripoli, she was a countess, and a bunch of his subjects, his pilgrims, went out and they found her and they came back and they told him of her beauty, and immediately he's just overtaken and he falls in love with her. And even before he leaves to go visit her in Tripoli, he begins to write songs and poems like the one I just recited, called Love from Afar poems or Amour de Loin poems. And they were actually invented and popularized by this man. This could be seen as a purer form of desire or love because it's not actually physical or fulfilled ever, it's just a romantic longing. So many people in the past saw this as a purer form of this. Now to where we are with this set of prints. They were created at the end of the 19th century in 1897, and this time was arguably the perfect time to reimagine a love story because everyone was writing against the moral and neoclassical and rigid standards of the Academy and status quo. So novels like Oscar Wilde's Picture of Dorian Gray imagine everything dramatic and emotional and laying on a long Victorian couch saying, "Woe is me." That's the kind of novel that would have been written at this time. And it's the perfect time for a love story to be reimagined and performed. So to start our movement towards Art Nouveau, which is the style that Alphonse Mucha developed, and which is featured in this exhibition. I'm going to go over here to this print. This is the title page from Il Sait, Princess of Tripoli without the text. So we see this area here is where the text would have been when they put the text in afterwards. And it is a great example of Art Nouveau as an art style. So I'll be explaining that through this print. So Art Nouveau was an art movement that developed between 1890 and 1910 as a reaction to the Academy and everything traditional in art. So it was sort of a transition period between the status quo and modernism, between like religious art that looked true to what reality was and modern art, which is more experimental and more about the artist's technique and their ideas than what actually exists. So Art Nouveau was a total style of art, meaning that it encompassed all media, including design, jewelry, furniture, art, anything you can think of in the realm of art or design or even literature. And through this, we can see that there is a rhythm in the motifs. There's a harmony with everything, even if it seems a bit crazy and asymmetrical. And also in here we see the very popular whiplash motif, which was used very commonly in furniture in Art Nouveau, and that's where there's really sharp curves that kind of go back and forth. I don't believe we have any Art Nouveau furniture here, so I can't show you an example, but the whiplash motif and also like floral and natural motifs were incredibly common in Art Nouveau artwork and furniture. So it peaked during the 1900 Paris Exposition, the Universal Exposition, and that drew millions of people to Paris to see the newest art styles from countries around the world. But after that, it started to decline, and by 1910, it was basically out the door for the next art movement, for Art Deco, which is very 1920s, very like roaring 20s, very decorative and dramatic and Broadway and everything like that. So there's no better master of Art Nouveau to many than Alphonse Mucha. He was born July 24th, 1860 in Moravia, which is now part of the Czech Republic. And he was born at a time when Czech independence and Czech pride was a really big thing. It was growing in his country. And he was also born during the rise of the arts and crafts movement in Britain, which brought personality and personal touch to furniture and art, as opposed to like manufactured in traditional status quo furniture that had been done before. It is said that he had an early talent for the arts. He went to a choral school to have formal training in singing, and he also did many drawings when he was younger. And in 1877, it said that he made the firm decision to become an artist with his life after visiting a church called St. Wenceslas and seeing the decorative Baroque art in that church. And if you look at these pieces, you can kind of see the influence of this decorative. Baroque art is very lavish and over the top, and you can definitely see that in his lithographs for Il Sait, Princess of Tripoli. In 1880, he became a scenery painter for a local theater company in Vienna and kept up with the contemporary art trends while he was there. And in 1882, he received his first commission, and he made his first poster, which allowed him to pay for formal training in Munich and Paris. So he joined the Munich Academy and then moved to Paris, where he attended the Académie Julian and Colarossi. In 1889, he was a professional illustrator and taught his own drawing classes and worked with artists such as Paul Gauguin, Auguste Rodin, and František Kupka. And by this time, he became a household name around the world. So he was very famous, and he was constantly getting commissions from governments and individuals and very wealthy people alike. By his late career, he had started to go out of favor because as artistic trends go, everything is developing so quickly, especially with modernism. So even as he was painting his 20 painting epic, the Slav epic, people were starting to forget about poor old Alphonse Mucha. Even so, the French government made him an officer of the Legion of Honor, and he had earlier been appointed the Sovereign Grand Commander of the Czech Supreme Council of Freemasons, which will be important in a little bit. So as his career was declining, the state of Europe was also declining, and at the outbreak of World War II, that's when things really started going downhill. The Czechoslovakian people faced an enormous depression, and it was very hard for people to survive their day-to-day lives. And even the Muchas, as they moved to Nice, France, to try to escape the worst of it, they still experienced a lot of hardship, as many people did throughout Europe. He became ill with pneumonia in 1938, and in early 1939, the Gestapo arrested him for his association with the Freemasons. And even though he was only captured for a few days, his health just rapidly deteriorated after that, and he died on July 14th, 1939. As I mentioned, he was largely forgotten, and nobody really thought his art was amazing anymore at his death. By that time, there were things like abstract expressionism was starting to emerge, like the very early parts of it, and this was as close to the status quo as modernism could get. Like, this was very, like, who wants a decorative piece of art when you can have someone's expression? And this was more associated with the academy and the old way and the conservative way than it was with anything new or exciting. But his son, thankfully, his son Jiří was his principal biographer, and he helped to revive his legacy after his death. Now he is known as the most famous Art Nouveau artist in the world, and he's also known for helping to reduce the divide between design and art. So he put just as much effort into his posters and his lithographs and his designs as he did into his epic paintings. And this is something that modernism really expanded on later. They closed the divide between high and low art. So things like Dada and Surrealism and Cubism, all of those movements really closed the gap between high art that the Academy would have wanted and low art that anybody can do, anybody can see, anybody can buy. So he was part of that reduction of the divide, which is a good accomplishment, I would say. So now on to the actual story of the Princess of Tripoli. I'm going to move back over there to the home base. So as I said before, The Princess of Tripoli, this story was written based on Geoffrey Rudel's original poem and his trope of the love from afar. However, this short story was based more heavily on a play called La Princesse Lointaine by Edmund Rostand, and it was a play that was written in 1895 for an actress and model named Sarah Bernhardt. And it was also the model for some of the illustrations of Ilse, like this one right here. So Alphonse Mucha worked very closely with Sarah Bernhardt. She was probably like the #1 actress of the time. I think like Jennifer Lawrence or, I don't know, Meryl Streep of that time. And Mucha designed her costumes and her posters for a very long time after doing like a really quick short notice project for her, and she just fell in love with his art style. So she worked with him very closely. And Ilse, Princess of Tripoli, the short story, was commissioned by a Parisian publisher named Henri Piazza in 1897. And as David said, it was written originally in French and then translated to Czech and German, and I used the German version to try to figure it out in English. The author of the manuscript of the story is named Robert de Fleur, and as soon as he finished his manuscript, Alphonse Mucha only had 3 months to complete 134 color lithographs to illustrate the story. So he later wrote about this experience saying, "We worked on 4 stones simultaneously. I did some of the drawing straight onto the stone. Other things, particularly the decorative edgings, I drew on tracing paper, which was then passed on to the draftsman who continued the work with the colors I specified. I hardly had time to sketch out the motif for an ornament when they came and took it from my hands and got down to work on it." So just looking, if you get a chance to look closely at these lithographs, it's just insane to me that he could do 134 of these delicate, pristine, like extremely detailed lithographs in just 3 months. So, unfortunately, now I have to move back over there to start with the actual story. So So it starts with the Rudel family, Joffrey is part of the Rudel family, the first in the family to own the location where this story takes place. His name was Arnaud Rudel. He was the son of the Count of Angoulême, and they owned the little township called Blaye. This lithograph here is the first page of the story. And here you can see there are some coats of arms for the Rudel family, and this is the beginnings of their rule in Blaye, France. And on the back, we are introduced to Joffrey Rudel's father, who is also named Joffrey. And as you can see, he's not too appropriate. He's drunk underneath a table. So he is famous for his escapades and his battles and his hunts, but he's also famous for his drunkenness and his love of women. And this leads him to have very many children. One of those is his son Joffrey. So the Rudel house was filled with an unusually powerful constitution, with the joy of a well-staffed house and a full table. They joined together in a lively inclination for the pleasures of love. There, fully clothed, he slept, a light air of ripe grapes in his hair, and on the ample tablecloth decorated with the coat of arms of the Counts of Angoulême. When his priest, the admirable Adalbert, walked through the hall early that morning to go to the early mass and saw his master, he thought it was the god Bacchus himself. However, when the pious gentleman, not without a faint regret, one that he probably did not want to confess, had found that the nymphs were not really there, he came to a clearer, less romantic view, and he went back to the cellars for his morning prayers. So basically, he's not really the holiest prince, but he was well liked, and he was very princely and very manly, and people liked that. And apparently, according to this story, Joffrey's many children, he had so many children with so many different mistresses and wives and women that the baptismal salts and incenses ran out. They didn't have any more for his township, and of course he was incredibly proud of that, for he had more children than even the king. On the day when he heard that, he was joyfully moved. He had the overwhelming desire to talk of love to a young shepherdess who had just been hired by one of his tenants. The narrator then says, "I do not dare to say whether the Lord was content with this." This is just one of the instances in which the narrator of this story in the actual text sort of injects his own opinions and sarcastic comments, which I really loved when I was reading this. Prince Joffrey was quite enamored with this young woman, and the narrator goes on to say, "Claret, the young shepherdess, brought a boy into the world a few months afterwards, precisely as time cannot say, since the poet worries about the contradiction by the mother of Claret, who thought she had become the grandmother of a little angel. Deeply moved by this event, Joffrey decided to give the child his own name. He went to his wife, whom he remembered only on very rare occasions, and begged her to accept and take care of the little boy as a son. But she refused to agree, as she feared there would be considerable disadvantage for her own son and daughter. Joffrey alone knew how to grant his wishes, and both she and her son died soon afterwards of a mysterious disease whose name cannot be ascertained." So, Joffrey and his son Joffrey are now the men of the house. They run everything and they get anything they want. But soon as things go, the wine and the drunkenness and the debauchery started to get old for old Prince Joffrey, and he became bored with everything. And suddenly he remembered that he had children. And he summons his priest Adalbert and his scientist Abler to go and fetch them and tell him about what they're doing. How are they? Are they brave? Are they worthy of me? Are they really my children as the prince of this township? And they leave, and a few hours later they come back to find him sleeping in his chair, as you do when you always drink. And they excitedly tell him about things that he did not ask for. The scientist tells him about a new invention that he made, hoping that he'll distract the prince from his actual desired the reason he sent him out. And the priest talks about these new chicken cages that he is putting up around the chapel. Don't know how that is relevant, and this makes Prince Joffrey really angry, and he breaks the arm of his chair and demands to know about his son, asking whether he is brave about his sword, whether he speaks to a war man, whether he is to show his men the master, whether he makes ample use of the friendliness of girls and women, and whether he will condole their husbands and educate grateful subjects, whether he be worthy of his father. And unfortunately, the priest has to respond, I can unfortunately not report to your glory, which I owe above all the truth, that your son is heroic. Joffrey is an accomplished rider. He rushes the deer without fatigue. He leads the sword just as his captain, but he avoids every opportunity to show his youthful strength in fighting and playing. It is not merely the roar of the battle which my student shyly avoids. He does not love the bright sound of glasses prepared in harmonious rows on gold-embroidered panels of velvet. He does not value the exquisite diet of your cakes master, a true artist, a man who is a pattern of conscientiousness in the fulfillment of his religious pansies. And it is not a sorrow of your heart, sir, which your son cannot feel joy or inner satisfaction when he sees the 4 spikes of fire, the smelling of the splashing fat, which you are all about to eat for this 7th hour. All of these are acting which should really raise the heart of a boy, and this is the reason why your son, my dear student, frightens me. He likes to be alone for a long time. The company of men is displeasing to him, and the women seem to frighten him. The maidens call him the seraph, and the young men, less cautious, call him the virgin with impious disrespect. For a moment, Prince Joffrey the Elder is hopeful. Maybe he'll just be a priest. Maybe he'll be holy and chaste, and it'll all be okay, because at least that's somewhat honorable. But unfortunately, that is not the case. Joffrey enters the room dressed in this fine robe and very fancy hat. You can see a larger picture of him over there. When we were doing research, we originally thought that these were depictions of women, but they're not. They're Prince Joffrey. And so this is a theme that's central to many Art Nouveau pieces, is that the role of women and the depiction of women is put so much higher than that of men, and if there is a depiction of a man, it is often feminized, or they're depicted as youthful, like boys and children, before they become masculine and hard-edged and anything like that. So this illustration shows Joffrey entering the room where his father and the scientist and the priest are discussing his failure as a son. The prince's father says, "My son, one tells me that the life you are driving is unnecessary and empty. You are afraid of the competition at the tournament, and more, so I was told, the soft curls of beautiful girls. This is an affront to manliness, to which I must scold you. You are as sensitive as a woman." So, on the back of this illustration, we get a glimpse at Joffrey and his father. So the one with the long black hair is Joffrey, much more feminine and sort of melancholy looking, and the one on the other side over here, this is his father, much more manly and pudgy and a bit ugly. So obviously there's a theme of like the visual of a character determining their personality. So the older Joffrey is a lot more brutal, and he's a lot more princely and manly, and Joffrey is a little bit more like, he wants to be in nature, he wants to float around, he's very pretty, and this is what he wants to be, and this is a theme that is central to Art Nouveau as well. And Joffrey responds tearfully, he says he does not want to do any of these things that his father wants him to do, and he would rather practice the fines of the dialectic and deal with the combinations of numbers and their peculiarities. From deepest soul, I love to follow the skies, follow the course of the stars, according to the calculations of learned astronomers, the small drops of light which have fallen into the infinite, the charm of the sun and the moon, the 5 zones and the 7 wandering stars. Like dreaming, these incredible wandering worlds float above our own and determine knowledge. When autumn has turned the forest into a desert of silence, it is still charming, and when its charm has disappeared, what it has lost and what the imagination has given to it without restraint, when the fields are still and flowerless, I seize the golden writing pen, and upon yellow parchment from age darkened, I write verses. An illustration over here, which I'll be going to, depicts his tools of the trade. He writes verse and poetry, much to the disdain of his father. Verse, a fleeting thing, a nothing, a specimen, but such a thing as the gods themselves know, no more loving on the shadows of the cithron which are shaded by the laurel. And you ask how to do it? They combine words to their brotherly harmony or hostile antagonism, and through their surprising fellowship express hatred or love, and spin the soul into melancholic-sounding melodies that the listener thinks they have come from the mighty lyre of the forest voice of the fauns and satyrs, mixed with the soft sighs of the nymphs whose shoulders are still moist from the dew of the morning. So just basically how Joffre speaks, you can tell that he writes poetry and prose, and he's not one to really have deep conversations with his father, who would much rather speak in more short tones. Joffre's little speeches are pages and pages long. These are only direct quotes from a very small amount of it, but you basically get the point. Joffre is very flowery in his speech. And even after his father dies and Joffre grows up and reaches the age of 21, he is still not exactly what his father hoped him to be, even as he grew up and became a man. He still spends his time in nature, writing prose and poetry. He goes to visit the flowers and he becomes their caretaker instead of doing all of his actual princely duties, which would probably make his father turn in the grave. Joffre stood still at the gnarled foot of a mighty oak. The shading branches spread over the forest. They steamed life round about and lulled nature into the melancholy charm of wilting and perishing. At the end of the arbor a figure appeared, as in veils of snow. She approached and came as the fulfillment of a dream and disappeared in the bend of the way. The sand of the sea smelled of their easy steps. This is the first mention of these visions that Joffre has throughout the story. He begins, once he's 21 years old, to have visions of beautiful women, but they distress him rather than comfort him because he does not believe that he loves them. This illustration here with the silver, the shiny silver and the ghostly woman going up into the sky is the first illustration of this vision of women that he has. Above all, he loved the flowers, the humble bleeds of the forest and the joyous chalices of the sword lilies, the languishing melancholy of the water lilies and the violets, dear to the saints of the old legends, worthy and silent. But above all, he loved the roses of France in their bright cheerfulness. The flowers had a soul for him. His dreams, the most beautiful as well as the most terrible, were always full of flowers. Joffre had made the vow to be a faithful, eager protector of flowers for all time. So, throughout all of this, even though he basically gets to do whatever he wants, he's very sad and melancholy, and everybody is worried about this depressed prince who won't do anything but sit in his hut in the forest and look at flowers. So, he goes to his sister, who is actually his half-sister, the legitimate princess of Blaye, and he asks her about her experience with love, and she also says that she is incredibly melancholy about it all, and she doesn't have anyone to love, even if all of the other women in the town do. So he gets even sadder, and everybody starts worrying even more. Something that I want to point out with this lithograph, and feel free to come and look at it as I'm talking, you don't have to stay back. It's clear in this lithograph that although there are main characters that are identifiable, there are also just general women in these lithographs, in these pieces. So there's this woman that is unidentified, there's a woman that is the sun, and this is a motif that's common not only in the Princess of Tripoli, but in other Art Nouveau pieces, where women are kind of they're just forces of nature, or they're just decorations, and they're beautiful, and they portray an idea rather than an actual woman. So this can be problematic. We'll discuss more of that later, but for now, let's keep moving with the story. And to make it worse, he is a kind man and allows captive Spanish women brought in by the Second Crusade to come into his palace. This is extremely controversial because they're Islamic women, and it makes people think that there are demons in the castle that are messing with not only the castle itself, but also Joffre's mind. There's a really awesome illustration that I wish we could put up, but there's no room, that it shows a bunch of the citizens of Bly, they're standing in front of the castle as like the literal devil is coming out of the top, just like giant monster. It's kind of humorous, but that's what they thought. They thought that he was shameful. They thought that they were demons in his mind. And so the Prince Adelbert decided that they were going to send pilgrims to the Holy Land of Jerusalem to try to get some forgiveness and some grace for their prince. So this scene here shows the washing of these women's feet, which sparked the controversy. On the reverse of this lithograph, I'm not going to take it down because I don't think I can get it back up there quickly. You can see the pilgrims leaving to go to Jerusalem and the Holy Land. And Joffrey agrees. He doesn't really care that much. He kind of just goes along with it, whatever will make people happy. So that is the end of part 1. Part 1 is all about Joffrey. There are 3 parts in the story, and part 2 is all about Princess Ilse. So this chapter 1, this is the first page of the second part about Ilse. And these figures here, these are all of her followers. They're going to a beach to meet her, and they begin bathing in the sea and gossiping about the princess's beauty, who she might marry, and why she's always weeping. So you start to see a parallel running between the two royalty. And she appears, and she is described like this. Oh, this look to which the earth was not worthy. What charm would be equal to the indelible charm of these eyes, which darkness and silence surrounded? They were bright like the pliable steel of precious weapons, but so profound and full of infinite compassion. She spoke with Gelda, to a close confidant, who asked why she was sad. And she said it wasn't because of the horrors of the war that her father was fighting, but rather because her father wants her to pick a husband. And then as they all travel to her oasis, which is a print on that wall over there, the top left on that wall, if you'd like to go look at that. The oasis is the most glorious in the world. A wide garden surrounded it with blooming roses, violets, and irises, powerful rhododendrons and azaleas. All around the forest stretched. In the clearing, the sunlight played on the clear, sparkling waters of white marble fountains. The birds, which made their songs to thousands, did not have to build their nests, for the good nature itself had undertaken this work. The palace of Ilse was of miraculous architecture. And it was here that the princess stayed away from her father in the city to avoid her princess duties. And when she arrives with her friend Gelda back at her palace, there's an announcement, and it's revealed that she has 4 guests in her palace, her father and 3 suitors, from whom he wants her to choose. So there's an illustration over on that wall. I'm not going to go over it so you guys can see. There's an illustration of a man, and he is very ugly. This is one of the men that Ilse's father wants her to marry. As Ilse entered her palace home, she was approached by a slave who told her of her awaiting guests. The narrator reveals here that Ilse is not actually a princess, but instead she loved to call herself that way because she thought that it would give her protection by the fairies, who also were princesses. Her father spoke. Consider these 3 gentlemen. You may freely choose among them. All 3 are the most honorable knights in the world and have everything to satisfy your wishes and your whims. The 3 gentlemen nodded angrily. They introduced themselves one by one. Erdelius the wise, Aldenius the clever, and Hildrich the warrior. Ilse responded to each of their stories, saying that her wisdom was too small, her sense too low, and her heart too fragile for any of them. Her outright rejection of these 3 gentlemen terrified her, and she had a vision of them surrounding her and killing her. She immediately refuses. She refuses to even talk to her father, but he demands that she give him an answer by the end of the night. He compares her to a witch, one that he has killed in the city just that day, and she finally relents and says that if no one else comes to ask for her hand, by the end of the night she will make a decision. She says, "The man that I will marry will be weak, full of pain and full of suffering. His eyes will be tired and full of the drama of life. They will look out far into unknown distances, and they will suffer under the too great nearness of the horizon, under the sharp clarity of the cliffs, and under the austere determinateness of our stay." So She hopes and prays that something will happen, but her father is very optimistic because her palace is so far away from any pilgrimages that he basically assumes that she will have to pick from the 3 men that he has chosen for her. But not a moment later, there's a cry from outside, and lo and behold, the pilgrims have arrived. The next morning, the pilgrims meet Ilse and fall to their knees. She welcomes them with gentleness and goodness, and they were in awe. They proclaimed, "She is more beautiful than our dear wives at home. Her eyes have the color of heaven. Her voice is as sweet as the morning wind." Ilse brings them food and drink, and her servants washed their feet. And she asked them how they came to her oasis and where they were from. They tell her the story of their journey, which was full of hardship, and they begin to weep. One of them says, "I weep because the Lord has not found us worthy of the grace which we have searched for on the sea." Ilse was confused. "What did your prayers desire?" she asked. They replied, "The hot pleading of our hearts did not ask for a favor for us. It is another man for whom we have taken on the journey. It is our Lord, the young master, whom a supernatural phenomenon pursues in the dark hours of the night as in the bright hours of the day." "Speak, tell me of your Lord," said Ilse. "Our young master has so striking expression in his clear and gentle eyes that one cannot look into his countenance without deep agitation. He always seems to look far beyond earthly things. He does not appreciate the wealth that surrounds him. He avoids the pioneers of his old castle and dwells on the banks of the pond in which the water roses bloom, and he spends his days and contemplates the trembling mirror of the water. We had gladly given our lives to bring him the remedies against that unknown disease, but the day is on the run, and we must mount the ship which carry us with white sails over the waves of France. We have to leave this blessed place." Ilse just laughs. She responds with laughter, and then she goes and follows them to the sea and watches them depart. You can see this scene right up there in this reproduction. The original is in that corner over there. Ilse watching the pilgrims leave her island. Let's see. She stood on the coast so close that the billowing waves covered her feet with white foam, long, long after the tallest mast had already disappeared, and looked out over the unfathomable sea, and farther the horizon seemed to recede and lose itself in new heavens, over which her dreams floated in the stars. Part 3 begins back in Blaye, and Joffrey's visions intensify. He begins seeing this one specific woman who is just so beautiful that he cannot resist but try to prove himself to her. So he actually starts fighting in the war and decides to go on the Second Crusade. And he's incredibly successful, and his subjects are very hopeful that maybe the pilgrimage was successful and these people found what they were looking for, and now the demons are gone from his head. But he remained humble, and he did not indulge in any pleasures of love like the other soldiers did, because he wanted to remain faithful to his dream mistress. And suddenly, as the battles got even worse, she stopped appearing. And after a particularly bloody battle, Joffrey paused to cry out against his dream woman, "Why hast thou forsaken me in this sad hour?" She appeared to him and spoke for the first time. "I am coming to you with mercy. The beauty of the dream we are spun into is threatened. Go back to the homeland, strong there your hope by the memory, and I will smile to you." Joffrey noticed that her veil was covered in blood, and the rocks upon which she stood were piled high with corpses. She left him without another word, and Joffrey left the war and the fighting to return to his castle, much to the surprise and disappointment of his subjects. After he returns from this event, he is even more unwell than usual. He begins to, instead of going to see his flowers, he begins to sleep all day and all night and does not accept food. He is even more worried when he learns each day that the pilgrims have not returned, and he thinks that they have been lost at sea, or that they all were captured, or they all died of disease or starvation. It was heartbreak for all those who came to his nearness to see his pale, decayed face. The stormy sea has perhaps devoured them, or the careless first mate has lost the leading trace of the stars. Joffrey sent messengers to the shores every day to watch for the pilgrims, but they did not return for a very long time. When they finally did, they had to bring him bad news. I am deeply grieved to announce to you that the Lord remained silent when we came to him asking for the grace of his light for you." Joffrey seemed to feel no remorse for this. He asked his faithful envoys to tell him of their long journey. They did it with reverence and modesty, and they spoke of their stop in Tripoli and their visit with the princess. They described her with enthusiasm, and their speeches betrayed inexpressible passion and sacred fervor, which still glowed their hearts in memory. They told him of her beauty, of her oasis, and her kind hospitality. An immeasurable joy painted in Joffrey's face. Now he knew the name of the woman who lived in his heart for so long. She lived surrounded by clear light on a distant shore, and he will see her. And he felt full of confusion, the joy of uncertainty of reality, without forgetting the suspicious sadness of the dream. "Now I will go out," cried Joffrey. "My life will soon be over, but I will follow the fate that has marked me." He decides to set off for Judah and then allow destiny to take him where it can. The next day, he said his goodbyes to his servants, family, and subjects. He left on a boat with other members of the crusade, and they set off into the evening. And that large print there, that is the scene where he realizes that his dream woman actually exists. That is his expression of joy. And he's just so thrilled in this moment that he begins to feel that life might be worth something. And we've made this very large so that you can see it. I'm going to be talking about these to finish out. The azure of the sky mingled with the mauve and rose-red inks of the high mountain peaks. The wind was swollen with the fragrances of the oleanders and of jasmine. Joffrey felt his powers dwindling and quietly contemplated the sky and the sea. Peace began to wash over him as the boat sailed to his faraway love. This illustration shows Joffrey on the boat with the red cross on his shirt, on his tunic, as they are sailed away towards Judah. They decide to go towards the Holy Land because they think that will help him, but he is willing to let fate take him where fate will take him. And that is depicted physically in this illustration here. You can see a large nude woman blowing the ship. And this could be seen as like the fates pushing his ship towards his love or towards wherever it will take him. When his crew worried that the ship was not moving due to the lack of wind and waves, Joffrey replied, "A woman so good that I even long doubted whether she lives on earth is our protector." Then everything between heaven and earth sounded together to a hymn to the mysterious princess. They continued toward Judah. Joffrey's condition deteriorated rapidly, and he soon refused all the food which was offered to him. He did not respond to anything addressed to him and seemed to have lost the use of language. Nevertheless, he sat for hours, his eyes fixed on the east, where the rising sun broke through the clouds. The whole crew could feel his death approaching. Then, suddenly, the wind was changing, and the boat was driven to the south without control, as if to bring the poor gentleman to the oasis where his dream lived. And after a few hours, the ship landed, and on their strong arms, the sailors carried the lifeless body of their master to the beach. Ilse came to the shore almost immediately. The crew explained to her who they were, and she interrupts, I know, that is your master. He is good and mild and comes from distant lands. His eyes are closed and I have never seen them, but I know his eyes. They are deep and gentle like those of the sea in the dreaming hour of twilight. For a long time, since the day when the pilgrims have visited my house, guided by the friendly power of the wind, I see his still image. Let him sleep. For a long time I have known him. For a long time my thought has grown like a flower of hope over him. Do not wake him. It is he, the friend of my soul. They bring Joffrey into the hall of Ilse's palace where she had prepared flowers for him. Suddenly, Joffrey opens his eyes. Oh, mistress of my dream! Oh, mistress of my dream! It is possible for me to be so blessed. The thought of you never left me, and the hope of finding you has never left me. For united we have ascended the divine bosom and find ourselves again. Princess, I feel it. You are my sister in the most sorrowful pity, and my eyes are fixed upon your own eyes, as the eyes of these good sailors who surround me dwell in the stars when night came. I am at the end of my dream. I must leave. Farewell to him and the invisible kingdom in which he rules. Give me your hands. She gave him her hands, and Joffrey put them on his eyes, and his soul was refreshed. Then, when death came, and when the enemies of his dream had disappeared, the dying man rose with his last strength upon the fragrant bed of flowers, and his eyes saw, his ears hoarded, his soul breathed the soul of the flowers and Ilse, which he so dearly loved, and his lips touched hers, the lips of his dream image, and his life escaped. She brought him flowers, saying, "They spoke to me of your sorrows, and they implored me to love you, and they revealed to me your heart and your soul. The flowers have voices, sweet and serious. I was obedient to them, for I am the servant of the flowers. I'll bring you roses and violets." She buried him in a tomb where flowers endlessly sprouted. The Princess of Tripoli then withdrew into one of those monasteries that had been founded by European women on the coast of Africa. There she lived in prayer and memory of her dream. This illustration here is one of the final in the story. It's one of my favorites. It represents Joffrey's dream and Ilse's dream that they will one day again be together, and these little hands, the hands of fate, pushing them together in this celestial field. So it's a really beautiful image to end the story on. So, after they left, the people in Bly waited, but no return. Amardine, Joffrey's half-sister, was now the noble in charge, but she didn't want anything to continue after her brother left, so she allowed the castle in which they lived to break down into the moat. One night, she decided to visit the hut that Joffrey had once called his home. To her dismay, the window pane was broken and the flowers disappeared. There was nothing but debris and dust. It seemed that the flowers had left when Joffrey had left. She lived in melancholy until death closed her eyes to eternal slumber. And that concludes the tale of Joffrey Rudel and Ilse, Princess of Tripoli.